Dr. Ryan and Matt Mouzakis here again. We are on week 2 of Job and very excited about what we have. Today we're getting into the bread and butter of this book. A lot of people have a hard time with the book of Job because of its outlook on how God may choose to deal with things like suffering in our life. So most people I know kind of look at this story as kind of a courtroom scene almost, and the cosmic evil figure of Satan is somehow allowed to come into the presence of God, and it's almost like a wager or a bet that comes between us, and we see God kind of playing with this family's life, allowing it to be completely ruined, and the whole family killed off and things like that, all to kind of make this point, and then by the end gives almost no explanation.
Yeah.
People have a hard time with it. Some people even kind of refer to it as, is God that kind of a monster?
Yeah.
And then others kind of say, no, that's not really a statement on the character of God in any way, and they look at this less literal and more kind of metaphorically, or perhaps possibly kind of in the form of maybe a play.
Yeah, or an allegory.
Yeah. So we're going to discuss some of those things today, but before we get there, we're going to talk about some of the questions, some of the reasons why people have a hard time with the book of Job.
Would God really kill people as a result of a trial or a test?
Many people look at this as a betting scene or a wager between God and another divine being. Is that what's going on here?
The question is, would God really hand the keys of the car over to Satan? Would he give that much power and sovereignty to the enemy?
Several times in the book of Job, we see thoughts that we have to separate. Is this man's thought or is this God's thought? One place is Job 42:11, where we see a statement on the evil that God brought upon you. Is that what man is saying, or is that the divine inspired authorship?
So we see that God, throughout the Bible, is a relational God, yet at the end of Job, he doesn't explain why Job went through all of this. Does God really have to explain himself?
How can a sovereign, loving God allow such suffering and tragedy in the world?
Now, Ryan, these are some tough questions, aren't they? And we talked a lot about them in our class last night, and the purpose of what we did and kind of what we're doing right now is to get people to think about theology. We're not here to give you the answers and tell you how to think about this stuff. These are serious questions about how you view God and his character. So rather than us giving you the answers right now, we want you to think about these questions and formulate based on the whole account of Scripture, is God good? And what's his character?
Those are great questions. And a lot of people read the Bible or have Bible studies and they never kind of get a theological grounding to how they access the rest of the Bible. And by asking these questions in Job, I think you're going to find that it kind of formulates your view of God and how you interpret the rest of Scripture at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So when you start getting into the theology of this book, you kind of have two major thought patterns. The first one is going to be more of the Reformed or Calvinist perspective of this, and I don't particularly fall this way, but it's the idea that the sovereignty of God is kind of unarguable. It doesn't really matter what God does in Job chapter 1, whether you think it's just or unjust or right or maybe humanly wrong. The take is that God knew all of these things from the beginning, and that's what's stated where Job is righteous, and there's no contention of that through the whole thing. And at the end of the book, God doesn't need to answer to anybody because he is God and he is sovereign. Now, you might accept that or you might have some problems with it, but there's also another way of looking at this.
Yeah, the other side is more of the relational theology, a dynamic God who interacts and has a relationship with his creatures and his creation, and that this suffering here is different than in the Calvinistic, that God doesn't cause these things to happen. It's because of the free will within creation that things come about, especially when it's people and people, that it's God's allowing that free will that he put into his creation to play itself out. But God will work for good in all situations.
So the way this flushes out is if you kind of take more of the Reformed view of it, then you kind of say God is actually steering the ship of everything. Mm-hmm. That whether it's good or evil, and some would even say that this puts God as the author of evil, to view it that way, but that God is sovereignly capable of everything. And we might not understand how he not only uses bad things, but how he might actually even kind of enable those situations.
Yeah, and they look at God maybe causing those bad things to test your faith or to mature you, and that's often that, but ultimately it's to work out a good end, and that's where they go with that. The other side is, God kind of paints God as a monster, they say,
Yeah.
and so God is not doing those things, that he's not the active cause of those, but he's in it working to bring about his purposes.
Yes. And the relational view is really going to see more of God just reacting to the evil that man and the spiritual fallen entities have brought on the earth, and God is kind of taking those things, and we like to think, as the scripture implies, that he's taking every one of those situations and working it to the best, but that's in question in this book too.
Yeah, it is.
So as you read this book, these are the things that you're working through in this book, and when you study theology, a lot of the tenets of those thought patterns are actually kind of founded within the pages of the book of Job.
It is. Right. So Ryan, you mentioned Job 42:11, which is kind of the crux of the book. So let me read that, and then we'll have a short discussion as we conclude the video today. Then all his brothers and all his sisters and all who had known him before came to him, and they ate bread with him at his house, and they consoled him and comforted him for all the adversities, and some translations there say evil, that the Lord had brought on him, and each gave him a piece of money and each a ring of gold.
So what we see here is there's this idea that God brought evil to somebody. Now, how do we translate this? What are the options?
NASB says adversities, or some that say trials, or some that flat out say evil.
Yep.
I mean, it's all within the semantic range. But I guess it's all on how do you perceive good and evil.
Yeah. You can take this two different ways. A lot of theologians will say that at this point, this is the inspired author that's saying this. So is this the inspired author quoting that God brought adversity or evil on somebody? Or, as we see many times in the rest of the Job, particularly the speeches of his friends, is this just recounting the way that Job's friends were looking at this situation, and it's not actually what God would have said about the situation?
I take it more that way, because it says that it was the friends and those who known him that said it. It wasn't thus saith the Lord.
Right.
And it's
the friends
same.
have been messed up the whole story
Yeah,
here.
I mean, God even says about them that they have spoken wrongly about me.
Yes,
So are they
yes.
are they still speaking wrongly about God?
They're not really reprimanded by God at any point in the story. You know, God is seeking to tell us what's going on here, but we don't get the idea that the friends in any way are kind of, you know, that God sends lightning to try them for what they've said or anything like that. So this is Job. This is your introduction to the theology of Job and how we're going to be thinking about this. And it does shape your theology and get you to start asking a lot of serious questions about how you view the character and possibly the nature of God.
All right, so we want to invite you to join us on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. here at Mount Zion. Next week, we're going to be tackling some of the characters in the book of Job. So the Satan, Job's earthly advisors, here his three friends, and Job's wife.
The characters.
Yep, the characters within the book. So join us this Wednesday at 6:30 at Mount Zion, and the Lord bless you and keep you.